Kenneth Branagh is a hugely versatile and ambitious actor, director and producer with a uniquely successful body of work across stage, television and film. This is his life in pictures. You arrived from Belfast here in England in 1970 and then school, the accent goes?
Yes, yeah. I came here with a very, very strong Northern Irish accent, which I now love. But then I couldn't, it was funny, the first couple of days here, just, I guess it must have been pretty broad, or at least it was broad to the people who were hearing it. So, yeah, that was, I suppose, the first bit of acting, frankly. I suppose the first acquisition of an accent was at that period trying to be understood.
So then school productions, I gather, there were plays at school.
Yeah.
Anything particular plays?
I played Dougal in The Magic Roundabout in a touring production. Where
did you tour?
We toured to other schools. I was 10 years old. I was covered in a brown blanket. It was not a successful impersonation of Dougal. It looked pretty ragged, but we took it to schools with younger children even than us, but we were very wildly excited. And my teacher, Beryl Levitt, Miss Levitt, who directed this and was very much part of the amateur scene in Reading, where that's where I ended up at primary school when I was about 10, was a great friend, it's a bit complicated this, a great friend of the sister of Ian McKellen. And so the story of Ian McKellen's career was one of the first that sort of came to me through Beryl Levitt, who said, there's a young man, and he was from Bolton and, northern accent, and, it was all, he came to London, etc. And he had just had, at that time, a huge success at the Edinburgh Festival playing Edward II. And she showed this 10, 11-year-old picture of Ian McKellen. There was a wonderful gesture he had. He looked so wonderful with the crown and everything. And so I guess that was my first introduction to a proper actor as well. A sort of grown-up classical actor was Ian McKellen while I was still playing Dougal.
So even when you were beneath the brown blanket as Dougal, were you one of those children who in the performance is kind of mouthing everybody else's lines and thinking, actually, I want to get in there and organise it? I mean, was that already there?
All I can say is I was very interested in the brown blanket. I was very interested in how that came about and how we did Dougal's Fringe, and it involved pinking shears and things, and I don't know, I asked about the pinking shears and what they were, and they were told that they were used especially in dressmaking, and this sort of lateral thing went out from there. When I did my third job was a television film which I saw here 30 years ago of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Very, very good film, I thought, by Colin Gregg. And when we were shooting it, I remember saying to Ken Westbury, the DP at that time, what are all these fancy little train lines that you have the camera on? And he'd say, well, that's the track. And what's this machine you have it on? That's the dolly. What do you mean dolly? Why is it called a dolly? I did absolutely begin to ask those kinds of questions, I suppose, early on, just because it seemed magical, and I certainly wanted to sit on the camera and ride on the little railway track, no question about that.
And your dream came true.
My dream came true. So, well, then later on they wouldn't quite let you. Oh, we need insurance for this, sir, and you need to be strapped in and that kind of thing. But no, I loved it, and in fact, I rather envy Steven Soderbergh. I believe operates the camera on all his movies, which I think is a wonderful thing to do. They let me do it when we're setting up shots, and indeed, so I do that rather than. Some people are absolutely wedded to Video Village, as we now call it, but to the monitor. But again, rather like Olivier in Prince and the Showgirl, one used to, with Henry V, the first picture I directed, we didn't have video assist, so you simply didn't have playback. I mean, I guess there was, but our film our budget didn't support that. So I would sit beside the camera, having ridden the camera, check the shot out, and I love the feel of the camera. Terrible with those wheels, but I love the feel of it, and it's the only way to sort of get a sense of the real image. And so that kind of intimacy with what's going on was usual to me.
My Lord of Cambridge, and my kind Lord of Masham, and you, my gentle knight, give me your thoughts. Think you not that the powers we bear with us will cut their passage through the force of France?
No doubt, my liege, if each man do his best.
I doubt not that.
Never was monarch better feared and loved than is your majesty.
True. We therefore have great cause of thankfulness. Uncle of Exeter, enlarge the man committed yesterday that railed against our person. We consider it was excess of wine that set him on. And on his more advice, we pardon him.
That's mercy, but too much security. Let him be punished, sovereign, lest example breed by his sufferance more of such a kind.
Oh. Let us yet be merciful.
So may your highness, and yet punish, too.
Sir, you show great mercy if you give him life after the taste of much correction.
Alas, your too much love and care of me are heavy orisons against this poor wretch. If little faults proceeding on distemper shall not be winked at, how shall we stretch our eye when capital crimes, chewed, swallowed, and digested, appear before us?
Were you absolutely clear? I mean, on this, your first film, were you obviously clear about how you were going to play things on stage? Were you absolutely clear about how it was going to be? I mean, one gets the sense of it being this great venture where everybody's, you know, pulling together and you're working with the actors that you knew and liked or loved or whatever. Was it that straightforward?
Well, it's interesting you say, were you absolutely clear? I can't imagine being absolutely clear about anything at that point. I knew that I'd been given the support by David Parfitt, distinguished former chairman of this organisation, and Stephen Evans, who helped bring the finance together in a way that no one else could. I knew that I had the opportunity, but there was a great big adventure to find out about how to make films. I suppose ignorance was bliss. And Orson Welles once said, you know, if you're making a film, either know a very little or absolutely everything. It was quite clear I knew very little then, but I had a strong instinct about the story and was excited by it. I mean, obviously, the opportunity was so wonderful, and to know to have a familiarity with the play and a sense of how certain scenes played and where there was comedy and where there wasn't, but then to take advantage of things that one had seen on stage that one felt could be very especially served in film. For instance, the role of the French king played by Paul Scofield. And when Paul was, I don't know, struggling is the wrong word, but when he was having a little bit of a problem with the role in the 2 weeks of rehearsal we had, I remember being bold enough to give him the note. I said, forgive me, I wanted to say Sir Paul, but he wasn't Sir, but forgive me, Paul. Would it help to know that for long periods in the grip of this mental illness, the King of France thought that he was made of glass? Mm. And he went, and you saw his eyes light up, and I never had to say another word to him. And when he first comes into the movie, his sort of fragility is so compelling that watching it, knowing that was something that sparked his imagination, was exciting, and that, I don't know, I felt that the film and him brought a dimension and a sort of illumination of that character that one would not otherwise have seen without film and without somebody of that talent.
And immediately offers came in, and you went to America, and there was a chance to do Dead Again and to play with sort of genres and styles. Did you have favourite periods in film already?
I liked thrillers very much. I liked the sort of golden period of Hollywood. I'm old enough to have been in a British television life in our domestic world, where there were 3 channels and then 4. And where Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon would always give you a classic Hollywood movie, including many sort of film noirs with Barbara Stanwyck or Rita Hayworth. Those are ones that I remember particularly, or films like Lara with the Otto Preminger film. And all of that had an impact on being drawn to Dead Again, but also the writer Scott Frank, who's since written Get Shorty and Minority Report, etc., a very fine writer, had a real feel for the City of the Angels and the world of Los Angeles in that period in the 30s was very, very exciting and exotic. So that was like a trip into a world of filmmaking that one had watched with wonder off the telly.
So tremendously prolific periods. You have Peter's Friends, you have Much Ado, you win the Michael Bulkin Award from BAFTA at this point, and you make Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which it seems to me a wonderfully kind of reckless picture. I mean, it's a kind of crazy film in some ways.
Yeah, the whole making of it. We had a huge set for Ingolstadt built down at Shepperton. We were on 9 of the sound stages with big sets. It was a big old-fashioned movie making, and I guess maybe, yeah, had the seeds of a certain kind of madness in it.
And of course you were also continuing to appear in other people's films as well, of which 1999 Celebrity with Woody Allen, in which you are Woody Allen. I mean, here, it is such a perfect inhabiting of Woody Allen that I can't believe you weren't aware you were doing it.
Well, when I read, got to tell you the letter. This is how I got the part. So a letter arrived one spring day, and it was from Woody Allen, and I was wildly excited about this. I opened it very slowly and took it out, and there it said Woody Allen at the top. Already, I felt like I was in the movies. Very exciting, and it began, "Dear Kenneth Branagh, please look at the role enclosed." This was a big thrill. I was getting the script, not just pages. "Enclosed is the film Celebrity. Please look at the part of Lee Simon. When I wrote this part, I knew that there was only one actor in the world who could play it. Alec Baldwin." "And he's not available." He said, so I thought for a while. So I thought for a while about Mel Gibson, but in the end decided that you would be more correct. That was the ringing endorsement, followed by a wonderful line where he said, "Lee Simon is essentially a loser, but he is attractive to women, therefore no facial hair."
Excuse me, Janet. We can finish this like in a second, so I don't want to get in the way of everything.
Oh, yeah?
So,
why don't you slip into bed, and we'll be there in 1 minute, all right?
Excuse me. You got a second? Because this is an unfamiliar scenario.
Listen to me, I know Gina from before, all right? You will not be sorry, trust me.
You mean all of us?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a
What's
second.
the problem with
What's the matter? You've never been with more than 2 bras before?
The woman thing is not a, the guy thing, I feel a little uncomfortable.
I mean, you know we're not getting together, right? You know, you do like women, don't you?
If it was, like on their own, for 2, 500, it wouldn't matter. It's just,
So my presence disturbs you?
No, like a naked man, per se, conceptually, a naked guy is not an issue for me, but I just, do we need the door?
Haven't you ever been in the boys' locker room?
Well, of course I have. I have track medals. I was all city. I
don't get it. What's the problem?
I don't know how to put it. It's like just, a wave of panic, at the proximity of unclad male genitalia in conjunction with the specific activity implied, add to which I'm still a little airsick.
Right.
So I don't know that I could go.
All your writers are so sensitive. You know what I mean? You should be writing greeting cards, not scripts.
I think the scripts of many of his films, in leading roles that are not played by him, nevertheless, I think, depend on this comic energy, which is essentially his comic energy. And also, I suppose, as I expect many of the people do, I certainly did, if you go in there as a worshipper, and I did, it's probably impossible not to be affected by being around the guy himself, although he's very mellow when directing and very un-Woody-like. If his comic persona as a performer is reserved for that venue. And
you're talking about the rhythm of comedy, but actually, of course, you're one of the great verse speakers of our time, and Shakespeare and the rhythm of Shakespeare is obviously something that you wanted another generation, I guess, to appreciate, or at least one more generation. And with your great project of bringing so many Shakespeares to the screen, and we're going towards a little clip of Love's Labour's Lost, which is from 2000, in which you demonstrate, you kind of call attention to the actual verse speaking, and then do something quite radical and different with it. So you really wanted people to appreciate what it was about the quality of the verse.
Well, I suppose I simply wanted people to hear in a way that they hadn't in other ways. There's nothing new in it, but it was perhaps a new way to think about doing it. In a film that ultimately, wasn't successful in lots of ways, but at the heart of it had an attempt to gather the sort of the joie de vivre of the Hollywood musical, the glamour, the romance, the sort of souffle quality of it, the deliciousness of it, and bring it into a play, Love's Labour's Lost, that in part had that also, because it was about 4 young men and 4 young women. The men take a vow to give up women, and of course immediately 4 beautiful women arrive, and the challenge of that and all the, you know, comedy and romantic mishaps occur. But along the way, it seemed that there was some beautiful, beautiful verse, and the iambic pentameter that has us beating out to be or not to be, that is the question, that is the underpinning of what Shakespeare does. It seemed possible to indicate in the fun form of tap dancing.
Have at you then, affection's men at arms. Consider what you first did swear unto.
To fast, to study, and to see no woman.
Flat treason against the kingly state of youth. Say, can you fast? Your stomachs are too young, and abstinence engenders maladies. For when would you, my liege, or you, have found the ground of study's excellence without the beauty of a woman's face? From woman's eyes, this doctrine I derive. They are the ground, the books, the academes, from whence doth spring the true Promethean fire. Oh, we have made a vow to study, lords, and in that vow we have forsworn our books. For when would you, my liege, or you, in leaden contemplation, have found out such fiery numbers as the prompting eyes of beauty's tutors have enriched you with?
To have a fairly absurd change of pace, Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter,
yes,
who is the fantastically self-regarding celebrity professor.
Yeah.
And that is riffing maybe just a tiny bit on your charm, perhaps a little bit.
Well, do you know one of the amazing things about doing that job was, I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, you know, as many people in this room may know, if you go to work on a film and you might get a sort of contact sheet, just a way of understanding where everybody is, and maybe it's 150 names. Maybe that would be quite a lot of names. And I remember getting the sort of contact list on Harry Potter when I arrived. So this is in case you need to get in touch with anyone. There were 1,500 names on it. And then I went around Leavesden, and there's the visual effects place that's inbuilt. There's the prop place that's sort of inbuilt. And they... I suppose in another life, maybe it would have taken me 4, 5, 6 weeks perhaps to film that part, and it took 9 months.
So we'll move on to another authority figure, and this is in Rabbit Proof Fence, a film that you made with director Philip Noyce, in which you play the man who was sort of the architect of this really quite sinister scheme to eradicate mixed-race Aboriginal children. I mean, it's a kind of eugenics program in some ways, wasn't it?
You talked of breeding them out. Come on, I'm not going to hurt you.
See? Further. That's it.
It's Molly, isn't it? I know it all feels very strange, but after a few days you'll feel quite at home. We're here to help and encourage you in this new world. Duty, service, responsibility. Those are our watchwords.
Molly, keep still.
It's all right, it's all right, it's all right. Nope.
The real fella A.O. Neville was all reported at the time, you know. A good man is how he was described by those who knew him. Wrong-headed, a product of his society, very committed, very sort of, in his own family, regarded as a good father, and very good, it seemed, in his dealings with Aborigines that he worked with, but under the sort of scheme and vision that what he just articulated represented, which was from a world that simply didn't accept how extraordinary and appalling it was.
So we're now getting to about 2008, and it's time to introduce a certain Swedish detective, I think.
Yeah.
Now, there was already you know, there were the novels, and there was a Swedish television series as well. So, I mean, how did you feel about the detective to start with?
The Wallander himself, or the sort of genre?
Well, the whole genre.
I read a lot of crime fiction and still do. And
so you knew about him already? Did you?
I did, yes. When it came along, I mean, I was partly involved in getting together the English series because I'd happened upon him. I'd started with an Icelandic novelist called, in terms of Scandinavian fiction from the far north anyway, with an Icelandic novelist called Arnaldur Idridason, who has what you might call a second cousin to Wallander as his hero in his books. That led me to the Wallander stories. And so I read them all. I read all the novels. The Troubled Man hadn't been published at that point, the last of the so-called last of the novels. But I read them all, and I suppose I read them all in a period of 3 or 4 months. They were very Moorish, and I read them in order. And something stuck, something felt the combination of the mysterious lands of southern Sweden, of Skåne, and of this sort of David Lynchian town of Ystad that seemed on the surface placid and calm, but seemed to have more, or at least as many murders as Midsummer does. No, it can't have that many murders, actually, can it? But with this, as we put it in one of the early films, poet detective, was something that might be very, very unusual to present on television.
Came and told me that you'd been hurt. Killed.
You're not a faceless policeman.
Well, I am to them.
I used to like power cuts. They were cozy.
I went on a date tonight.
You replied? Oh my God, what happened?
I was late. She chucked me.
You were late?
It was impossible. It was...
I know. But does there always have to be something more important than you having a life? You're not going back to the station now.
He doesn't have Columbo's Mac, etc. He doesn't have a series of things that that particularly characterize him, except one might say misery. And in the first film of the new series, which is called An Event in Autumn, even I put the script down at the end of that one and went, bloody hell, wow, that's a tough time he has in that film. But it's, you know, on the way it becomes very, very illuminating. And he says, it's quite touching in that film, he says, when someone points out to him how tough it is to be around him, he says, well, I think I'm basically quite a cheerful person. And I think he thinks he is. But he does empathize, sympathize, feel the pain and the appalling nature of these violent crimes.
So from that kind of contemplation, although it's certainly not without incident, but that kind of contemplation to Thor, to superhero action adventure on a vast scale. Yeah. I mean, a number of people were quite surprised when they heard that you were taking that on as a directing project.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I was thinking this is my Scandinavian period, so I had the Swede on the telly and the Norseman on the films, and I played Hamlet I played the Dane on the stage a lot. Well, it was a surprise to me, but I was familiar with the character from my childhood and was full of vivid memories of this mixture of superhero and sort of archetype wearing brightly coloured clothes, but somehow inside all that having a very sort of atavistic kind of quality, very, well, a Viking quality, basically, that was just entitled and brutal. And that kind of darker energy, very sort of primal energy underneath this comic book material seemed like something that I was very drawn to.
But in terms of the way you actually make a film like that, it's difficult to think of anything that's travelled further from sort of Henry V, where you may have to deal with a horse and some elements.
Yeah, yeah.
But on the whole here, you've got these vast special effects, entire elements of the drama that actually physically aren't there when you're shooting. You've got this enormous cast. I mean, it must have been exhausting in a way that nothing else you've ever done.
Exhausting in a way that nothing else has been, and stimulating in quite a different way. And you really had the choice of loving the fact that you were lucky enough to be in this position, having a time in Hollywood I'd visited, but I'd never really stayed and worked there. And it was ludicrously exciting to walk on the first day, even though your heart is a-pounding when we were on a big soundstage and we had, I don't know, 25 frost giants who'd been up since 2 o'clock in the morning being swathed in prosthetic makeup. And we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 camera crews. We had all of the principals in their costumes for the first time. We had one enormous soundstage, half of which was a built frost giant interior with vast columns, throne rooms, etc. And the other side was green screen. We had the gaggle of visual effects people who were there ready to take me to my maths and physics lecture, which was how do you do this in 3D? And then a lot of actors who wanted to know what the scene was about. And also the writer coming on with the script pages. I've done it, I've got them for you. Yeah, it's a bit late. All at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning, on whatever it was, January the 11th, imprinted in my brain of 2010. Okay, this is Thor, get on with it. And I did.
And now we're going to come right up to date with My Week with Marilyn, which is a film set in 1957 and based on Colin Clark's memoir about a time when he was working as a gopher on a film being directed by, and the star was also Sir Laurence Olivier, as he was at that stage, actor, director, dealing with Marilyn Monroe as his co-star, and you playing him. I mean, there are so many aspects of him that you could pick up on. What did you decide to concentrate on?
Well, the fun thing was to try and physically transform a bit. He didn't have, indeed, facial hair. It would have been well cast in a Woody Allen film, but he didn't have that. And we put a prosthetic chin piece on. We gave me a bottom lip. Nice to have a lip for once in my life. And that would take about 2.5 to 3 hours. And during that period, while we were doing the hair and the very arched eyebrows, he had 2 looks, him as himself. He was very, very well turned out. He was a wonderfully handsome man. And then a rather more theatrical look for the role he played in the film of the Duke. I would listen to him on headphones give his dramatic reading of the Bible, which he does in its entirety. And it's quite something. And I watched everything. There's a couple of wonderful documentaries. Apart from Melvyn Bragg did a sensational one in I guess the early 80s on Olivier. But there's a marvelous conversation he has with Ken Tynan on the stage of the Old Vic in the early 60s on great acting. And one just tried to find. Sort of bit of that voice, a bit of that he had a sort of curious kind of lisp, and he was one of those people who used he was very quiet when he wanted people's attention, so people would lean forward. He just had complete command over his voice, and he was a chameleon actor, so in the course of any one day, people like Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Jacobi, who both worked with him extensively, would say that he'd be many, many parts, all of them wonderful. But Gielgud used to say of him that it was sometimes hard to find the man himself.
Take 17.
Well, we're still the first ones, aren't we? Gee, this is all right, too, isn't it?
Cut! What is the matter now? You wait! Marilyn, please, tell me how I can help you.
I don't know who else he is, and I can't act her if I don't know who she is.
You have her precisely. You understand her inside out. I'm in awe of your gift. We all are.
She's not real.
Then why not simply rely on your natural talents?
So are you saying you don't want me to act?
Marilyn, will you just try to be sexy? Isn't that what you do?
In this little snapshot of their world, it was interesting to play him at a moment. He was just exactly the same age, actually, as I am now, and it was a kind of midlife crisis moment for him, it seemed. That's what he wrote of, consequently. And he was looking for Marilyn to renew him, to associate him with the new and the youthful and the vigorous and the sexy and everything. Not that he wasn't those things, but he felt that he wasn't. He was becoming a bit too establishment. And although it didn't really work for the performance in the film, I don't think, with all humility, it's not one of his best, I don't think. But he then went on to do a transcendently brilliant performance as Archie Rice in The Entertainer just a year later, which seemed to benefit from I don't know, whatever, the experience of watching Marilyn or watching others, the Brandos, etc. Whatever way he connected with it, he did break through. And the sort of stuffed shirt that the New York Times described his performance as, which partly character was, he was still magnificent to watch, but just by his own extraordinary standards, it maybe just wasn't the finest. But he certainly became a quite different actor after that.
And what do you think he would make of your portrayal of him?
When Derek Jacobi played Mr. Puff in The Critic and Oedipus in a double bill of characters and plays that Olivier had made famous, daringly so, in the 40s, I think it was, at the Old Vic, and Derek did at the Birmingham Rep, just after he'd left the National. Olivier sent him a telegram on the first night which simply read, "Cheeky bugger." I suspect I'd be very lucky if I got a cheeky bugger remark from him. Maybe that's what he'd think.